Can The Lord of the Rings of Power, restore Middle-earth to its former glory? This article was published a few days ago with an interesting premise, which states that Rings of Power can at least be a stepping stone for new stories set in Tolkien's world. So let's go through the article and I'll give my thoughts on what the author has to say. So the first part is basically about Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, and of course it compliments Peter Jackson on bringing the world of Tolkien to life and introducing it to a new audience, which is of course fully justified because through the films a lot of people got to know Tolkien through an easier to understand medium, mainly the visual medium, which helps to captivate an audience often more than a book can. But it resulted in the book sales. It's still one of the most popular books ever published. So it's really a great accomplishment to bring this difficult to film work to life in such a successful way. So it continues with the Hobbit trilogy, which expanded, as I say, a relatively light source material, about 350 pages, into another vast trilogy, pulling from other parts of Tolkien's canon. And to be fair, I thought there were some good moments in The Hobbit, but overall, it felt like butter scraped over too much bread, as Bilbo would say, because it's just too much for actually a quite short story. 3 films is too much, and the additional information is yeah, it's distracting. So we see that the author says or asks how the series can prove to be another sterling entry in the franchise, and now I guess we'll have to wait and see that. So a first remark made here is that the series uses increasing practical effects, or has an increased focus on practical effects, and will shift away from the CGI heavy orcs as used in The Hobbit, which is great because, I mean, with the right amount of practical effects and prosthetics, you can give this world a really real feeling. So it helps to immerse your audience into the world and make them forget about the real world for a while and see the world they see in film or in a series as, you know, the real thing. It helps, you know, to captivate your audience. It is there that The Hobbit also failed because of the CGI used for the orcs, um, which wasn't really that great. So let's continue. We see here, as we've said before, that the Hobbit films are pulling from so many different sources to expand the story, which ultimately left it muddled in places. So it says also that the original trilogy was pulling from Tolkien's books, um, and that in The Hobbit they also used the appendices of the Return of the Kings, of the King, and the Unfinished Tales, and of course, at time forgetting that it was Bilbo's story. Yeah, it was distracting. There was too much going on. I mean, the romance with Darmerial was unnecessary. Legolas' entry was also not really needed. There was a lot of additional stuff that was really best kept out, but unfortunately it made it in. Um, and that's also a part of the reason why the Hobbit films aren't as beloved as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Furthermore, it says that the Rings of Power is telling a largely original story, not drawn from a specific part of Tolkien's source material, although there is clear potential for elements of the Silmarillion to be incorporated. Yeah, that's just a blatant lie on the part of the author, because it is based on a specific part of Tolkien's source material, namely the appendices of the Return of the King. 150 pages of background to the Second Age and Third Age, with background for the languages, some background for the peoples. There are chronologies there about what happened and when it happened, and also some family trees. It goes on to say that the series will be more tangential, which basically means that um, what is being told is diverging from the main story, and that the main story can still be understood without this material being in there. I don't know if they meant to use this word, but if they meant to use it, it's not really a compliment. So it says that The Hobbit felt like it was trying too hard to explain certain characters' origins or what they were doing during the events. Also, yeah, it distracted from the story, although it was really nice to see Christopher Lee again, to see Kate Blanchett again, Hugo Weaving in the White Council. It was fun, but yeah, was it necessary? Maybe yes, maybe no. I haven't decided. There were cool scenes, but um, ultimately they didn't really contribute to the story. So, and they could have been left out. So, the next statement is that the Rings of Power doesn't have the baggage of the previous films attached to it, and so has more freedom to tell an expansive story. It's something really weird that it doesn't have the baggage. Maybe they mean the source material, because the Rings of Power does have heavy source material in the terms of the appendices, and also fragments in The Hobbit and in the Lord of the Rings novels. So there is baggage, uh, and there isn't as much freedom to tell an expansive story as you'd expect, because the story told in the appendices is already expansive. It's over 3,000 years long. What it does have is the benefit of exploring unfamiliar characters, locations, and time frames. And yeah, that's true. It would be really nice to see a great rendition of Celebrimbor or Gilgalad, because we've only seen Gilgalad. Um, well, I don't think we've seen him in the prequel um, bit in the Fellowship of the Ring. So it's really nice that they introduce these characters, but will it be good? Will their story be told as it's been written, or will it take too much freedom with it? That's also a huge concern, and it's a righteous concern. So it says basically that the series has a huge playground to explore in the lead up to the initial conflict between the free peoples of Middle-earth and the forces of Sauron. It will also provide an expanded role for the likes of Morpeth Clark's Galadriel, and promises to bring a more diverse feel to the universe than the 6 films that preceded it. The question is, of course, is that a good thing? Because the way they've shown stuff, the way they talk about the series, they talk about the characters, it doesn't feel like the diversity is really set within the world. And what I mean by that is, for example, Princess Disa and Ismael Cruz Cordova's Arondir. So Disa is Black Dwarf, Arondir is as they call it, a Latino elf, or an elf of color, but they don't really make sense in the world, because Tolkien wrote elves down as being fair skinned. That's also in Appendix F of The Return of the King. And the dwarves were inspired by German and Nordic mythology, as being great craftsmen, smiths living underground. So it wouldn't make sense to have a black dwarf there. Also, if there is only one black dwarf and one Latino elf, where are the rest of them? Because they can't come out of nowhere. Well, technically they can if they were created um, in the beginning of the years of the trees, sure, or the years of the lamps even. I mean, it could be done, but then they live for several thousands of years. They had to look to survive the various wars with Morgoth. Um, Dwarves aren't immortal, so it wouldn't make sense to have a black dwarf from even from the first age to still live in the second age. Um, so, I mean, if there were multiple colored elves, and if they had been described so, it would make more sense in the world, because then you have a group and not just an individual. I don't know if that makes sense, but well, in my head it does. Um, but it feels forced, and that's not a good thing because people don't like things that are just forced in there um, just for the sake of having diversity. Because in Tolkien's world, you can have diversity, no problem. You have the Haradrim, you have the Lossoth, but that's also not from the appendices, so they can't adapt those. We have the Druidine, we have the Easterlings. There's even one of the houses of men in the first stage, the House of Beor, um, which had people ranging from fair skin to darker skin, but they were basically wiped out around the year 500 of the first stage, and the rest of them joined other houses of men, the two other houses of men, which were white-skinned people or fair-skinned people. So the gene of darker skinned people could have survived until the second age. It could not have survived, um, but it would have survived in a lesser way than it did before, because the rest of the men are basically fair skinned. So, I mean, diversity is, yeah, it is possible. So, what it also says is that it's an opportunity for the Lord of the Rings franchise to find its footing once more, taking clear inspiration from what worked with the initial films, while paving the way forward for a wealth of exciting new adventures in Middle Earth. Yeah, well, to me personally, Middle Earth never lost its footing, and the franchise never lost its footing because we have even more works of Tolkien now than we did before the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Uh, for example, The Nature of Middle Earth, um, and The Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien. We have all those books now, and we have even more material to work with, but Amazon only has the rights for The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and yeah, of course, the appendices to The Return of the King. That's not really much if you want to work with the second age. Maybe that's specifically why they chose for the second age, because now they don't really have much to work with, and they can argue to the benefit of why they change so much. They change so much, and they change the characters sometimes completely, like Galadriel, who is now a warrior queen or princess, something like that. She's at least commanding forces, and she's in Numenor. What never happened? She never went to Numenor. She never fought in pitched battles. She wanted to rule over a land in Middle Earth, and that's the reason why she left Valinor in the first place. But she never conquered through force. She never hunted the enemy. She never went, climbing in the mountains, killing orcs. I mean, she did none of that. What makes Galadriel so powerful, so enigmatic, and what makes her a great character is that through all the hardships she went, she didn't choose revenge. She didn't choose blatant violence to suppress her rage. She honed her wisdom. She honed her character. I mean, she worked on herself for the betterment of her people, and that what makes is what a great thing about Galadriel, which is now basically ruined and thrown overboard for a warrior. And also, of course, we have Darmerial, the Queen Regent of Numenor, which she wasn't. She was supposed to be the fourth Queen of Numenor, but Pharazôn, or Ar-Pharazôn, who is just a counselor to her in the series, he was the leader of a rebellion when her father, Tar Palantir, died, and then he took the throne. He married her against her will, and she never sat on the throne, she never ruled. So that's another thing that has been completely changed. Darmiriel and our Pharazôn, and also because they are condensing the story so much, they don't have these thousands of years to tell. The downfall of Numenor will be, in my eyes, less impressive because it's over such a short amount of time. And what makes the downfall of Numenor so interesting for me is that it happened over thousands of years. It didn't just go, well, snap, and there's the downfall, and there you go, descending into anarchy and rebellion and fighting against the Valar. It didn't happen that way. It was a slow, gradual process with people trying to turn the tide, to return to the old ways, to honor the Valar, to go back to trade with the elves. Um, it didn't work out, and that's so interesting about it, about Numenor, that eventually the descent was so great that Numenor just was destroyed in the end because of the actions of the kings through the actions of previous kings over thousands of years, and that will be completely gone. So the whole thing about Sauron building his power slowly over the years, it will be just completely undone. And it's like snap, Sauron's there. He has hundreds of thousands of orcs, and yeah, that's it. And it will feel like a lesser story. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and see you in the next one.